I hate to do this because I really am a humble guy deep down, but I called it. I told you so. Everyone told me I was crazy. Oh, Vince, what are you smoking, crack? You really think Alabama's gonna outright beat Georgia? No, fool, I'm not smoking crack. I am smoking facts. And that is exactly what happens here as Alabama upsets Georgia 27-24. I am one of the few people who went out there and publicly called it. And now I expect the apologies. Woo! I have so much money to collect, by the way, not just from sports betting websites, but from friends as well, because apparently I was one of the few people who saw this coming. They all called me crazy. Well, look, now I think it is time for all of you casuals, and that is what you are, casuals, to apologize. And let me be clear by what I mean, okay? By the way, I'm going to put up this picture right here of Nick Saban the entire time, because clearly, since not enough of you respected the GOAT in all of his glory and greatness, even in the later days, even in the last stance, well, you better respect it now. So there you go. 100% real, not photoshopped picture of Nick Saban and his new haircut. But anyways, let me be clear what I mean, okay? By casuals, I don't mean people who pick Georgia to win, because I think that was always a reasonable take. To me, this game was basically a pick'em. But by casuals, I mean the people who said, it is crazy for you to even think Alabama has a chance, Vince. Georgia's gonna murder them. What are you even talking about? Didn't you see Alabama almost lose to Auburn in the Iron Bowl last week? What are you smoking? How could you possibly think they have a shot to knock off 29 straight win Georgia in this game? Well, let me explain two things for the casuals, for the people who do not understand this sport, and for the people who ridiculed me, said the nastiest things about my prediction here. Two important lessons I hope you learn now and never repeat ever again. First of all, lesson number one, transitive property, right? The idea that what happened last week must carry over to this week is not a real thing in college football. These are 18 to 22 year olds. It's an extreme roller coaster with them. And just because a team looks bad or should have lost or did lose a game last week does not mean that same team is going to show up on the field this week. And again, anyone who has watched enough college football will know this, but anyone who just, again, is not actually a serious fan of this sport and just looks at scoreboards and like, oh, that logic must equate. It's not how this works. This is not algebra. This is not like objective computational science. This is a sport of 18 to 22 year olds. And again, transitive property does not apply. So anyone who looked at the result last week and thought that must mean Georgia destroys them this week, totally stupid take. Humble yourself, seriously. And secondly, the second lesson you all need to learn is please do not doubt the GOAT. Okay, do not doubt Nick Saban. You are talking about the greatest coach of all time. And again, I'm not saying that picking Georgia to win this game was a ridiculous take, but for people who just didn't think that would matter, oh, Nick Saban is washed, the dynasty is over, blah, 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 all these different excuses. Again, look at the picture, okay? Just bask in its glory, all right? Submit, okay? Anyway, so with that said, just had to get that out of the way because I took, you read the comment section of my prediction video for Georgia, Alabama, I took the nastiest comments for that. In fact, you know what? Let's do one more cocky thing here. Play the video of what I said last week before we get into this game. This is just going to be a case where that historic, Nick Saban amazing coaching job just comes through a little bit. Truthfully, I think the fact that Alabama has played in so many close games this year, including the Iron Bowl the week before, maybe has them a little bit more prepared to come in and be kind of clutch in that situation, right? You seem to think there might be a little bit more of an eye of the tiger, maybe a little bit more of the burning energy, in the Alabama team, especially later on this year than the Georgia team, right? Intensity does matter as well, not just who's the better team, who comes in on fire with the intensity, right? I think that edge goes to Alabama. All right, with that all in mind, let's get into actually breaking down this game here. So, you look at the first three drives. Bama goes 3 and out. Georgia marches right down the field like a mean machine in red and black, scores at 7-0. Bama goes 3 and out again. And immediately I am thinking to myself, oh boy, here we go. I'm about to look incredibly stupid. But I also really understood that they were going to settle in, and that's exactly what happened here. Bama did settle in, and then I think what you saw, because I think the story here in this game needs to be broken down into the first 3 quarters and then the fourth quarter. But for the first 3 quarters, once Alabama settles in, what you start to see is what I fully predicted Bama to be playing with this week. And again, the casuals who were trying to apply transitive property did not understand this, which is big game, big moment. You saw them playing with all the intensity in the world. Offense, especially in that second quarter, basically just punching Georgia in the mouth. Defense flying to the ball. Georgia could not really get anything going there, right? And on the flip side, you see a Georgia team who, I thought they were invincible. I thought, 29 straight wins must mean 30 straight wins. Again, this game is different than other games, right? Georgia looks a little bit lost. You saw some mistakes. You saw some penalties. And next thing you know, it is 17-7 going into the second half. And ultimately, really the story of this game is that Georgia was not able to do enough in the time that they needed to dig themselves out of this game. Now, let's talk about Jalen Milroe, because that's obviously the talking point. Anytime a team, wins a game, you look at the winning team's quarterback. But the truth is, again, you got to break this up between 3 quarters and the fourth quarter, because there's a different story in this game here. But I thought through 3 quarters, Jalen Milroe really didn't play all that great in this game. I mean, don't get me wrong. That second quarter, that drive toward the end to make it 17-7 kind of turned it on in that moment. But you look through the first 3/4, 75% of this game. I felt like at times he was holding on the ball way too long, and you saw some of the sacks there that ended drives or put them out of field goal range, right? Holding onto the ball for too long. I felt like he was overthrowing. There's a lot of passes, especially in that first half, where it's just like, come on, man, you gotta make that, right? But ultimately, the story here is that when it counted, when everything was on the line, Georgia gets that punt return in the fourth quarter and, makes it a 20-17 game. When it all mattered, when it all counted, he has that drive in the middle of the fourth quarter, takes him right down the field, incredibly clutch, goes full Brady mode. I think Gary Danielson was comparing it to Tebow in 2008. And obviously on that very last drive there, when you needed a few first downs to seal off the game, you see what many Alabama fans felt like you haven't seen enough of this year, which is the legs of Jalen Milroe. The guy was unstoppable. When you really consider the stakes of what was going on, one of the better fourth quarter performances you've seen from an Alabama quarterback in this SEC championship game. And that's saying a lot, right? But ultimately, as much as people will talk about Milroe and the Alabama offense in this game, I think the real story of this game is actually on the other side, which is the matchup in the story of the Georgia offense trying to move the ball on the Alabama defense, right? Because as much as people will talk about Milroe's fourth quarter, I think the part that people are missing is that I felt like, the second quarter was a little bit of a disaster, but still overall, I thought Georgia's defense made a lot of stops, especially in that third quarter when they're down, 17-7, 20-10, stuff like that. That gave their offense more than enough chances to get back in this game. I think it was either 3 to 4 punts that they forced the Alabama offense to in that third quarter, right? So I thought Georgia's defense overall played well, or you thought at least did enough to get Georgia back in this game. Because listen, I don't think anyone was expecting Georgia's defense, especially this defense, I don't think is as good as the 2021 or even the 2022 ones, to, hold Alabama to like 10 points. But I thought they did enough. I think the real story of this game is the fact that Georgia, with the exception of that first drive, really could not do anything on offense, could not move the ball substantially through 3 quarters. They dug themselves in that hole, and ultimately, fourth quarter, they turn it on a little bit, but it just wasn't enough, and that's why they lost, right? And don't get me wrong, on one hand, all the credit goes to the Alabama defense. Alabama obviously has one of the best defenses in college football. Arguably, it's not talked about nearly enough, but here's my thing on the other side. And I'm a little bit conflicted on this. It's kind of an open question. I think this is a point of discussion, and I'd love to hear Georgia fans or whatever your thoughts on this. But I've been asking this for honestly several years now, which is, does Kirby Smart and Georgia need to sort of, I don't know if the right term is modernize the offense, but maybe open it up, spread it out a little bit, and maybe recruit a little bit differently in order to spread out that offense? Because everyone knows the identity of Georgia football, right? They run an old school sort of style. They want to play physical, kind of throw it to the tight ends. You want your quarterback to be something of a game manager, right? And don't get me wrong. I think the past couple of years, you've slowly seen this Georgia offense get more and more slightly dynamic. But overall, this has been a theme of Kirby Smart teams going all the way back before the glory days to like the Jake Fromm days, right? Which is phenomenal defense. And again, Georgia fans, some of you may feel like your defense failed you in this game, and maybe to an extent that's true, but I don't think that's the true story here, right? Great defense, always, every single Kirby Smart team, but in a sport nowadays that sometimes does favor the offense and sometimes does require you to put the game on your offense and your quarterback and go win the game, Kirby Smart, I felt like basically his entire tenure at Georgia has sometimes had an offense that cannot adequately keep up. And you're going to say, well, Vince, what are you talking about, or why does that matter? I mean, they just won 2 national championships. This is 1 loss. It's a phenomenal record. Aren't you overreacting a little bit? And perhaps I am. But I think back to how close perhaps Georgia came to not winning the past 2 national championships, right? Think back to 2021. This exact game where Alabama seemed like a far worse team. Georgia was dominant all year. And then what happens? Bryce Young, and specifically those receivers, right? I forget who got hurt when, but Mechie, Jamison Williams, right? Just again, the story is they're not going to be able to move the ball. Georgia has one of the best defenses of all time. But what happens? They do move the ball. They're basically torching them down the field again on the outside with that speed. Georgia's defense couldn't keep up. And then ultimately the story is that Georgia's offense was not nearly dynamic enough to match the touchdowns, match the scoring. What happens? Shockingly, Alabama wins 41-24 in that game. And many Alabama fans would argue, I don't know if they're right or wrong, but they would argue that if Jamison Williams and Mechie do not get hurt before and in that national championship game, Alabama may have won another title, and this sort of recent dynasty from Georgia would not even have started. I think also to last year versus Ohio State, where again, Georgia managed to pull off the game in the end. So now no one really talks about it. But now that you're kind of looking at a long-term pattern, I think this discussion is relevant, which is I really felt like CJ Stroud, Marvin Harrison Jr., that same type of thing, right? Speed on the outside, dynamic offense did have Georgia on the ropes. They looked incredibly faltering and on the ropes in that game. And you saw Georgia's offense, certainly, even though they're a lot better that year, just struggling to keep up. And ultimately, again, they pull off the win, so it doesn't really matter. Okay. But again, I still think you sort of look at how close you might have been to not being able to pull that off. Still a conversation to be had. And then you go into this year. Okay, and this year, this game is a totally different story. Don't get me wrong. It was not because Alabama on the other side had a historically good or dynamic offense, but there's a similar story because I go back to this idea of having an offense that is predicated, on sort of that game manager type of quarterback and throwing to the tight ends a lot, and not having a lot of speed and super athletic receivers on the outside. It just felt like Georgia's receivers, especially through 3 quarters when they were struggling to move the ball, could not get any separation. You'd see every time Carson Beck would throw the ball, looks kind of open, but the receiver doesn't have enough space, and Alabama's very athletic and, talented secondary, closes on the ball, tips it away a couple different times where they sort of dropped what should have been interceptions. And again, what does that come down to besides maybe Carson Beck not making the right decisions? It comes down to the speed on that Alabama secondary and some of Georgia's players on offense just not being able to really have the athleticism to get that separation there, right? And don't get me wrong, before you say it, I get it. Brock Bowers and Lad McConkey especially were not 100% healthy in this game, so maybe that's kind of an excuse you could use, but I think the idea still stands, right? Because who was there to back them up? You know, when you've been recruiting at the level of Georgia, shouldn't you have a bunch of other, if you're gonna, you know, tight ends and receivers and stuff to back, but they're just not really there, or they weren't there enough in this game, at least through 3 quarters. And so even if this game went a little different, I still feel like Georgia's offensive approach, and, you know, Dog fans, I'd love to hear your thoughts, because I am conflicted, because some of it sounds like, oh, you're playing Monday morning quarterback here. You're complaining because they lost 1 game. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just still kind of pointing out what I've been thinking here, not just because of this game, but for years now about that Georgia offense, because you did feel like, again, the story of this game was not Georgia's defense couldn't make a stop. Okay, maybe they couldn't make a stop when it mattered, but they made plenty of stops in that 3rd quarter to get you back into this game. But the offense just, like, couldn't do it. You know what I mean? And again, a lot of credit there goes to Alabama's defense, but maybe Georgia's offense left a little bit to be desired in this game. I don't know. You know, Kirby Smart, obviously, still an amazing coach. Not here to doubt him or say anything bad about the guy, but is it time for a little bit of a recreation on offense? I don't know. Would love to hear, obviously, your guys' thoughts. But anyways, long story short here, all the credit in the world goes to Nick Saban and Alabama. Everyone doubted them. Oh, you can't do it. Again, I didn't even think Milroe played his best game through 3 quarters, but ultimately they got it done. He's still the king. Talking about Nick Saban, of course. Don't you ever say, oh, he's washed. Dynasty's over. Shut up. So let's just hope Louisville wins tonight, okay? And, you know, we got some news recently. Tate Rodemaker may not be playing, and let me change my prediction here on the fly about that game. I think of Brock Glenn. That's a 3rd-string quarterback for FSU. Talented, can run really well, but he's a true freshman, right? I think if Rodemaker doesn't play, because I did pick Florida State to narrowly win this game. I think if Brock Glenn is, because a big reason for that is because I thought Rodemaker, as much as he maybe not as flashy as Travis, he's been in the system, I think 4 years now, 4 years. You know, he's a good game manager quarterback, not going to make a catastrophic mistake, at least has some experience under his belt. I think you put a raw, true freshman in there, and if he's put in a situation where he has to win what inevitably, I think either way, will be a close game, I just don't count on him to not make the mistakes or the turnovers or whatever it is to not screw over Florida State. So let's hope that Louisville does win tonight, because I truly do think Alabama and Texas, both 2 of the 4 best teams in this country, and they deserve a shot at the playoff, truly. So anyways, with that said, folks, that'll wrap it up for this video. I gotta go collect my money from all the doubters. I will be listening to Leonard Skinner. I will be listening to Alabama, Dixieland Delight. I'm not even an Alabama fan, but you don't understand, okay? When you doubt a man, when you tell him he's wrong, when you tell him he's stupid. Today, I'm an Alabama fan for one day, okay? I'm drinking all the Kool-Aid because nobody believed me. Everyone disrespected the GOAT. He still owns you. He still owns Kirby Smart. Don't you ever doubt it. All right, folks, with that said, see you guys later. God bless. For one day, roll Tide in peace.